He was the kind of student teachers loved to mention in parent meetings. Vihan, consistent, polite, brilliant. His notebooks were always neat, his answers always correct, and his future seemed already written, clear and bright. Vihan didn't just want to succeed, he expected to. Not out of arrogance, but because that's what everyone had told him his whole life. "You're the one who'll make it big," his uncle would say. "You're different," his teachers would repeat. So when the national entrance exam results came out, failure wasn't just unexpected, it was unimaginable. He stared at the screen in disbelief. His score didn't even come close to the cutoff. He refreshed the page. Then again, nothing changed. It was still his name, still his result, and still not enough. The silence in the room grew louder than any noise he'd ever heard. He closed the laptop and sat motionless for minutes that felt like hours. Then he stood up and quietly walked to his room. No outburst, no tears, just a blank stare. For 2 days, he didn't speak to anyone. He turned off his phone, ignored messages, lay in bed wondering how one number, one exam, had undone years of effort, expectation, and identity. He had never really thought about what failure felt like. Now he knew, and he hated it. The house stayed quiet. His parents didn't pressure him with questions. They could feel it too, that this wasn't just a bad grade. It was a collapse. On the third night, Vihan finally stepped outside. He walked aimlessly through narrow streets and ended up in front of an old, dimly lit tea shop, a place he had passed countless times but never entered. Tonight he did. The owner, a man in his 60s, gave him a nod and served a hot cup without asking. Vihan sipped in silence. The tea was simple, just milk, sugar, and leaves, but in that moment it felt like comfort. An old bookshelf near the counter caught his eye. Covered in dust, it held used paperbacks, yellowed pages, and forgotten titles. One book stood out, The Beauty of Breaking Down. He picked it up, sat at the far corner, and began reading. The first chapter hit him hard. It wasn't about winning or overcoming, but about accepting the weight of falling. It spoke of failure not as a mistake, but as a moment of redirection. For the first time, Vihan wasn't fighting his feelings. He was sitting with them, letting them sting, letting them breathe. When he returned home that night, he didn't feel fixed, but he felt something he hadn't in days, possibility. He didn't open his textbooks. He opened a blank notebook instead. And for the first time in years, he wrote something that wasn't tied to scores, goals, or expectations. Just thoughts. Raw. Honest. And he realized, maybe this failure wasn't the end. Maybe it was asking him a question. If not this, then what? The days that followed weren't magical. Nothing suddenly made sense, but Vihan kept showing up, for himself. Each morning he took a walk without headphones, just air, thoughts, and space to think. He revisited old hobbies, things he'd once loved but abandoned in the race to stay ahead. Drawing, sketching, mind-mapping ideas that had nothing to do with academics. He started asking himself a different kind of question. What would I still love doing, even if no one praised me for it? It was hard at first, but slowly answers came. He took a free design course online, just to explore. He watched documentaries on creators, thinkers, people who had once failed miserably before they found their true voice. Their stories weren't clean or easy, but they were real. One night he wrote a blog post titled, "Failing Forward, My Wake-Up Call." He didn't share it, he just saved it as a draft. But the act of writing it, of owning his story, felt powerful. He began to see failure differently, not as a signal to quit, but as an invitation to rethink. Maybe success wasn't about always winning. Maybe it was about understanding who you are when you don't. Call to action, soft and story aligned. If this story connects with something inside you, take a moment, like the video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and share it with someone who needs it. And if you want more stories that go deeper than just motivation, subscribe. We're building something honest here. A few weeks later, Vihan finally gathered the courage to publish that blog post. He didn't expect much, maybe a few views, maybe silence, but something in him needed to release it, not to be seen, but to let go. By the next day, a few strangers had left comments. One said, "This is exactly how I feel right now." Another wrote, "Thank you for putting this into words. I thought I was the only one." That hit him harder than he expected. His failure, once so personal and painful, had just helped someone else feel less alone. He kept writing, not to teach, not to inspire, just to share what he was learning, slowly, painfully, truthfully. More people found his words, students, burnt-out professionals, parents, even teachers. Vihan began to realize something. He wasn't starting over. He was starting right. He wasn't a motivational speaker or a self-help guru. He was a boy who had fallen, stood up, and now chose to walk with others who were still on the ground. In time, he began mentoring students, not with tips to score higher, but with questions that mattered more. What do you love? What are you afraid of? Who are you when no one's watching? He wasn't just rebuilding his life. He was rebuilding it on truth. And it all began with one line on a results screen that once made him feel like a failure. A year passed. Vihan was no longer known as the boy who failed. That label had quietly disappeared because he had stopped wearing it. He had built a small platform, a personal space where he shared his journey through articles, sketches, and reflections. Nothing flashy, nothing viral, but deeply human. One of his blog posts got picked up by an education site. Then a podcast invited him to talk, not about success, but about resilience, not about grades, but about identity. He wasn't chasing titles anymore. He was chasing meaning. He'd meet younger students struggling under the same weight he once carried. The fear of disappointing their families, the pressure to always be the best, the silence around failure. Vihan didn't give them shortcuts. He didn't tell them it would all be okay. He simply told them the truth, that sometimes failure is the first time life gives you permission to be honest. He'd often return to that same tea shop where everything began. The old man behind the counter now greeted him with a smile and a stronger cup. They didn't speak much, but both knew the story that had unfolded. One evening, Vihan pulled out the same notebook he'd once filled with pain and confusion. Now its pages held clarity, direction, a kind of peace that didn't come from achieving, but from accepting, reflecting, and rebuilding. And in the corner of the final page he wrote, "I didn't fail. I just listened to life for the first time." Vihan stood at the edge of a school auditorium stage, not as a guest of honor, not as a star student, but as someone invited to share his story. He looked out at the faces, young, hopeful, anxious, the same kind of crowd he once sat in. But this time, he wasn't performing. He wasn't there to impress. He was there to be real. He spoke simply about the day he failed, about the silence that followed, about the strange peace that came when he finally stopped pretending. He talked about shifting his definition of success from being admired to being aligned, from always achieving to always understanding, from chasing a title to building a life. No dramatic music, no heroic twist, just quiet change. After the talk, a student approached him, nervous. "What if I don't make it?" the boy asked. "What if I fail like you did?" Vihan smiled, not the smile of someone who avoided failure, but the kind of smile you earn when you've walked through it. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and said, "Then you'll start. That's what failure does. It starts you over. This time, more honest than before." He walked out into the evening light, breathing in the air like he had that night a year ago. But now it smelled different, not like regret, not like fear. It smelled like freedom. And in that final thought, one truth remained. Sometimes it only takes one failure to become the person success was always waiting for. And now it's your turn. What's one failure that changed you? Not your results, but your mindset. Drop it in the comments. Your story might just be someone else's turning point.